Have you ever heard a knock at the door in the middle of the night? No message, no phone call, just 3 faint taps. Knock, knock, knock while the world is fast asleep. Who could be behind that door? A stranger in need of help, or someone waiting for the moment you let your guard down in tonight's video. You'll hear 5 true stories of late-night knocks, each leaving behind a haunting memory that never fades. Story 1. The Midnight Visitor. That night, I woke up to a faint sound, the dry tick of an air duct clicking inside the walls. Then silence. I looked at the clock. 3:07 a.m. Outside the bedroom window lay a velvet black darkness. My wife lay on her side, breathing evenly, her hair falling across half her face. The house was so quiet, I could hear the clock in the living room striking each second, tick by tick. Then came the knocking. Knock, knock, knock. 3 raps, evenly spaced, as if someone were knocking softly to avoid startling anyone. I sat up a little. Downstairs, our old dog Bruno wheezed and shifted on the rug near the front door. He didn't bark, didn't growl. That was strange. Bruno barked at everything, even leaves blowing across the yard. "Did you hear that?" my wife asked, her voice rough with sleep. "I'll go check," I said, pulling the blanket back over her. Maybe someone's at the wrong house. Each step down the stairs felt longer than usual. I didn't turn on the hallway lights, letting my eyes adjust to the dark. Our suburban street was dimly lit by a single street lamp at the corner, its yellow glow filtering through the thin curtains and drawing a pale rectangle across the hardwood floor in front of the door. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. Still 3 beats, same rhythm, but heavier this time, as if the knuckles pressed harder. I glanced at the living room clock, 3:09. Who would knock on someone's door at this hour? My neighbors all had my phone number, and if it were urgent, they'd ring the doorbell, not knock politely as if asking, "May I bother you?" Bruno still didn't react. He only raised his head, staring at the door, ears twitching. I touched his neck warm and dry, as much to reassure myself as him. I stepped closer to the door and looked through the peephole. At first, nothing, just the dark stretch of the front yard, the line of the roof cutting diagonally across my view. Then, from the edge, a face slid into sight, only half a cheek in the yellow glow, shining slightly as though damp with sweat. The person stood far to the left, right where the peephole warped everything. I only caught a sharp nose and a rigid jawline before the face slipped away again, deliberately hiding. I swallowed and kept my voice low. "Who's there?" Heavy silence. Then a man's voice, younger than I expected, broke from the porch. I had an accident. My phone's dead. Could I just make one call?" His voice trembled, like someone who had been running. "Why not ring the doorbell?" I asked without thinking. A pause. The bell. Doesn't seem to work. But it did. I had changed the batteries myself just last week. "Step back," I said. "I'll call for you." No need to call anyone. I just need one call. No police." His words spilled fast, blending with the breeze sweeping across the porch. The phrase "no police" sent a chill down my spine. If I had really been in an accident, the police would be the first people I'd want. I peered again. A dark coat loomed at an angle on the porch, hands hanging loose, clenching, unclenching, clenching again, like a nervous tick. Farther out by the curb, I noticed a low, dark shape, maybe a car parked with the lights off. I squinted. For a moment, I thought I saw a faint red blink from the dashboard, then gone. Where was the accident? I asked, as calmly as I could. Is anyone hurt? Just down the street, he replied instantly, too smoothly, like a rehearsed line. Nobody hurt, just, my car won't start. Then 3 more knocks. Knock, knock, knock. This time not pleading, just rhythmic. A reminder I'm still here. My fingers brushed the cold chain lock. My mind raced through every story I'd ever read, thieves pretending to need help, gangs forcing entry, one man distracting while another circled behind, all with details so ordinary you'd dismiss them as stammer. A half-believable excuse. I'm calling 911, I said, enunciating every word. You wait outside. I told you no police. His voice dropped lower, no longer trembling. I only need to come inside for a minute. It's cold. It wasn't cold. That March night was mild. Sweat trickled down my spine, not from heat. I left the peephole, slipped to the side table, grabbed my phone. The 911 operator picked up almost instantly. I whispered my address, gave a brief description. Calmly, she instructed me to lock every door, avoid speaking further, keep the line open if anything changed. A patrol car is on the way, she said. Don't open the door. Check that your back entrances are secure. I whispered thanks. Hung up. Bruno whimpered now, tail twitching. I patted his head. The knocking stopped. That sudden silence pressed against the house, magnifying every sound, the fridge clicking, the roof creaking, the clock ticking. I checked the doorbell camera on my phone. The grainy yellow image showed the porch swaying slightly with the wind. No one stood in frame, just the empty edge of the step. I flipped to the garage camera, cursing under my breath. It had been low on battery for days. Now it was frozen at a frame from 9:12 Mom. And the side gate, had I locked it tonight. Then came another sound, not knocking, but a scraping, dragging lightly along the brick wall to the left, then stopping. Bruno leapt up, paws on the window ledge, growling deep in his chest. A faint scent hung in the air like old iron, or rain, seeping into wood. I slid open the window latch just enough for a fingertip gap. Outside, in the narrow view, I caught a glimpse another figure moving low along the wall, almost crawling. The dark coat absorbed the light. I only saw the grass shift with his movement. My heart pounded like hammers. At the front door, the accident man lingered just out of sight. At the side wall, another figure crouched low. I shut the window tight, grabbed my phone, texted both nearby neighbors, strangers around my house at 3:15. Don't open your doors. I've called 911. The messages showed delivered. No replies. Everyone was asleep. Back at the peephole, I found only darkness. Not the yard, not the porch, just a solid black circle, pressed up against the lens. Someone was covering it. A muffled whisper seeped through the wood. You in there? The voice came not from the man at the porch, but from the hinge side of the door. Another man, deeper voiced. Bruno bared his teeth, then snapped his head toward the kitchen. I turned just in time to see a shadow slip past the glass back door. Testing the handle. The faint click of metal turning twice. Too soft, too deliberate. I bolted to the back, heart slamming, cursing myself for leaving it unlocked earlier. The knob was cold but firm. It hadn't turned. The deadbolt still in place. Through the curtain gap, I peered out. The old maple tree hunched black against the sky. At the fence line, something shifted, a figure so still it blended into the dark. Only the tilt of its head gave it away. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. A flat male voice, as if reciting, "Hey, open the door." I froze. The call came directly to my phone. How did they have my number? Then, across the room, the old walkie-talkie my son had left in the living room crackled to life. I'd forgotten to switch it off. Static hissed, then another warped voice, echoing the same words, "Hey, open the door." One beat slower, like a delayed replay. I hung up, yanked the plug from the walkie-talkie. Breath caught in my chest. Checked the doorbell camera again. The porch looked empty, except for a fleeting shadow at the very bottom of the frame. The tip of a shoe standing inches from the step. My scalp prickled. I backed away, tiptoeing to the utility closet. No weapons, only a heavy metal flashlight. I gripped it tight, comforted by its weight. The house itself seemed to shift, the air denser, the temperature off by a fraction, as if someone stood just behind a wall. I heard faint footsteps on the porch, not approaching the front door, but moving sideways toward the side entrance. Then a whisper, barely audible, filtered through the kitchen glass. "There's a child inside." My jaw clenched. My son slept upstairs, next to our bedroom. They knew. They were counting. Time stretched like syrup. I checked locks, front door bolted and chained, back door deadbolted, side door latched, kitchen window locked, living room windows secured. All fine except the garage camera dead, and the side gate uncertain. They knew the weaknesses, as if studying the house. I forced myself to breathe steadily. Just 10 minutes, maybe 15, until police arrived. But 10 minutes at 3 can feel like a lifetime. I made one choice. I flipped on every light downstairs. The kitchen flared bright, scattering the dark, and in that exact instant, at the glass of the back door, a face pressed close, just a forehead and an eye, then gone. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the table. Bruno went berserk, barking, snarling, and then, as if in answer, the front knocking changed. No longer polite knock, 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 but rapid, frantic, pounding 3321 like a code. My gut twisted. It was a message. We tried polite. Now it's different. Above, the smoke detector in the corner beeped once sharp, random. Then silence. I looked up, the light still green. I sniffed faintly plastic, singed faintly. A thought struck like lightning, someone heating the sensor with a lighter outside, testing my reaction. Or was it my fraying nerves? The chaos thickened. My phone buzzed, motion alert. Backyard camera. I opened it. The frame was dark, no floodlight. Then, faintly, 2 tiny points of light appeared, low to the ground, reflecting like animal eyes. But they were too far apart, too still. Not a cat, not a dog. I stared, slowly. The points rose higher, rising to full height. Not eyes, reflective strips on pant legs, catching light. Someone was standing there, unfolding to their full height. Upstairs, a soft click, like a door latch shifting. My wife awake, or my son's door. Sweat slid down my temple. I tilted my head upward, and just then, from the peephole now blacked out, a voice hissed against the wood. "Hey, open the door." I backed away from the front door, as if a jolt of electricity had shot through my spine. Bruno barked wildly, his teeth chattering together. The knocking stopped, replaced by a silence so deep it made my ears ring. For a split second, I wished I could hear anything: wind, insects, but no. The air felt thick, drained of sound. I pressed my back to the wall, forcing each heartbeat down. I had to get upstairs, had to make sure my wife and son were safe. One step, then another. I crept up the staircase. The wood creaked beneath my bare feet, loud, echoing, as if the whole house could hear it. I held my breath, listening. No further movement. At the landing, I glanced down. Every downstairs light blazed bright. The kitchen, the living room, the entryway. Yet the peephole at the front door was still blocked, as if a hand pressed firmly against it. I shivered, kept moving. The bedroom door was cracked open. My wife stood there, eyes wide with fear. "What's happening? Shh," I whispered, finger to my lips. "Stay inside. Lock the door. Don't open it until you hear my voice. The police are on their way." She nodded, trembling, then shut the door. The faint click of the lock sounded like a prayer. I turned to my son's room. Closed. Silent. I eased the door open, peered inside. He was still curled under the blanket, clutching his teddy bear, breathing steadily. I gripped the flashlight tighter, silently thanking God. And then thud. A heavy blow slammed against the front door. No more polite knocking. This was pounding, urgent and forceful. The whole house shook. Bruno howled, a choked, strangled sound, like his chest would burst. A man shouted from the porch, "Open the door, now." Another voice echoed from the backyard, "We see you." My throat closed. At least 2, maybe 3. They had surrounded my house. I rushed into my son's room, locked the door. I shoved a small dresser against it, though I knew it wouldn't hold long. Hands shaking, I dialed 911 again. The same calm female dispatcher answered. "They're trying to get in," I whispered. "At least 3 of them." "Listen to me," she said firmly, slowly. "Keep a weapon in hand. Stay locked inside with your family. A patrol car is 3 minutes away. You'll hear the sirens soon." I drew a deep breath. My son stirred, rubbing his eyes. "Daddy, what's going on?" I hugged him close. "It's okay, buddy. Just some strangers outside. The police are almost here." The moment the words left my mouth crash, a window shattered downstairs, glass scattering across the floor. Bruno roared, lunging toward the sound. Heavy footsteps thundered on the porch, mingled with grotesque, mocking laughter. Someone yelled, "Come on, let's go." I pulled my son into my wife's arms in the adjoining room, then braced the door. And just then, from far away, the shriek of a siren cut through the night. Sharp, piercing, splitting open the suffocating dread that had wrapped around the house. Outside, the footsteps retreated. The laughter died. The only sound left was the tinkling of broken glass and the fading rush of feet on grass. Then the distant roar of an engine tearing away. The siren grew louder, closer. I ran to the upstairs balcony. Down the street, blue and red lights strobed. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt in front of the house. 3 officers jumped out, flashlights sweeping, guns drawn. Police. On the ground, they shouted into the night. But there was no one. Only shards of glass glittering on the lawn, and clear shoe prints stamped into the grass, leading away toward the end of the street. An officer knocked, calling, "You're safe now. Open the door." I hesitated, then slid the chain, cracked it open. His stern face shone in the beam of his flashlight. "You all right?" I nodded, knees buckling. There were at least 3. I rasped. They knocked, then pounded, then broke the window. I think they were coming in. The officer exchanged a look with his partners, then said, "We found a car abandoned at the corner. Flashlight left inside, plates removed. This wasn't an accident." When I brought my wife and son into the living room, the police had already cordoned off the scene. A young officer was photographing shards of broken glass, while another followed the trail of shoe prints stamped into the grass. Standing there in the flashing red and blue lights, I felt my familiar home had transformed into some strange stage. Everything mixed together. The glare, the sounds, the smell of brick dust, the musk of the dog's sweat, an unbelievable tableau. We've had similar reports in nearby neighborhoods, an older officer told me. They pretend to have an accident, ask to use a phone, and the moment the door opens, the whole group rushes in. Sometimes it's just theft, sometimes worse. You did the right thing by not opening that door. I nodded, throat dry. My wife clutched our son tightly, her eyes still rimmed red. I thought of those first knocks. Tap, 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 gentle, polite, and the chill that had raced down my spine. I knew that if I'd been even slightly less cautious, if I had opened the door even a crack, my family might not be standing here now to listen to the officer's explanation. Another officer approached, lowering his voice. "We'll increase patrols in this area for the next few weeks, but you should upgrade your security motion lights, backup battery cameras, and..." He paused, meeting my eyes directly. "Never trust the story of a stranger knocking at 3 a.m." After the police left, the house fell silent again. But it wasn't the ordinary, peaceful silence of before. It was a fragile shell laid over a lingering dread. I sat down in a chair, staring at the glittering glass on the floor, replaying that moment when the peephole went dark, when a whisper came through the wood. "Hey, open the door." That night, we didn't sleep in our own house. My wife and I packed a few essentials, carried our son across to the neighbors. As I closed the door behind me, the wind brushed lightly against the porch, echoing a rhythm I recognized too well. Tap, tap, tap. I told myself it was only the wind, but my heart didn't believe it. And even now, whenever someone knocks on my door late at night, whether it's a neighbor or a delivery driver at the wrong address, I freeze for a few seconds. Memories flooding back like a cold blade pressed against the back of my neck. I don't just hear the knock, I hear the warning. There are people out there who don't come seeking help. They come to test if you're ready to open the door to fate. Story 2. The Silent Knocker. I moved into this small apartment at the start of the new school year. It was an old 4-story building, with long, narrow hallways lined with faded carpet. I was a sophomore, living alone for the first time, feeling both free and empty. During the day, everything seemed normal. The sound of people passing by, the elevator screeching, the smell of coffee drifting in from the corner cafe. But at night, the building felt completely different. The hallways turned dark, silent enough that I could hear the ticking of the clock. The first night it happened was a Wednesday. I had just come back from a late study session, collapsed into bed, exhausted, the clock reading 1:47 a. I hadn't even drifted into sleep yet when I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. 3 knocks. Steady. I jolted upright. Who would knock at this hour? My breathing slowed as I listened. No voices, no footsteps. Just the knocking. Then silence. I told myself it was probably someone at the wrong door and tried to sleep again. But at exactly 2:13 the knocking came back. 3 knocks, the same rhythm. I tiptoed to the door, pressed my eye to the peephole. The hallway was empty. The stained carpet stretched all the way to the end, the neon lights above flickering weakly. No one there. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to reason. Maybe some students on my floor were just playing pranks. I went back to bed, pulled the blanket over me, tried to force my eyes shut. The next morning, I asked a classmate who lived on the 3rd floor too. "Did you hear knocking on doors last night?" She shook her head and said she slept soundly. When I explained a little, she just laughed. "Maybe you were half dreaming." I tried to believe that. But the following night, right at 1:50, the knocking came again. 3 knocks, identical. I shot up, this time determined to react differently. I switched off all the lights, crept behind the door, and waited. After a few seconds of silence, I suddenly twisted the handle and yanked the door open. No one. The hallway lay empty, silent. I shuddered and shut the door again. And almost as if to mock me, just as I slid the latch shut, the knocking sounded again, this time directly behind me. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, sweat sliding down my temple. But the door was locked, sealed tight, not even a crack. From that night on, it became a routine. Almost every night, somewhere between 1:30 and 2:00 a.m., the knocking returned. No one ever at the door. No one ever caught. I began losing sleep, nerves stretched thin. I even set up my phone to record secretly. But the videos showed nothing, only an empty hallway. Each time the knocking echoed, the camera shook slightly, yet no figure appeared. Then, one day, when I was at my breaking point, considering moving out, an elderly neighbor from the 4th floor struck up a conversation with me in the elevator. She looked at the dark circles under my eyes and asked, "You've heard it, haven't you?" I stared at her. You've heard the knocking too." She looked straight into my eyes, her voice raspy. "It's been knocking for years, always at that hour. But no one has ever seen what it is." The old woman's words slid across the back of my neck like a cold blade. I stammered. "You said, who is it?" She looked down at the floor of the elevator, her voice low. "Not who. Something. This building is old. Some say, back in the 70s, a young woman lived alone on the 3rd floor. One night, the neighbors heard her screaming, blood-curdling, and then silence. When the police broke down her door, all they found was an empty room. No body, no trace. Just the wooden door, beaten from the inside, as if she had been trying to claw her way out. I shuddered. She told it as if it were a plain fact, without exaggeration. Then she lifted her head, her eyes dark and heavy. "Which unit are you in?" "3rd floor." 307, I answered. Her face paled. "That's the very one." The elevator doors slid open. She stepped out, leaving me frozen like a statue. A wave of icy dread swelled inside me, heavy and suffocating. That night, I decided I had to prove to myself this was just a prank. I set up my laptop connected to a small camera aimed at the door, switched it to night mode. I sat in the dark, only a dim desk lamp casting a weak glow. My heart pounded as I stared at the screen. 1:45. Nothing. 1:50. Silent. 1:55. Tap, tap, tap. The sound rang out clearly inside the room. I jumped, eyes locked on the screen. The camera captured the door shaking gently 3 beats. But there was no one standing outside. No shadow, no movement. Just the door, knocking on itself. Cold sweat streamed down my face. I gripped the heavy metal flashlight, breath caught in my chest. This time, instead of keeping silent, I yelled, "Who's there?" No answer. The hallway was still empty, but then, through the peephole, I suddenly saw a shadowy figure. No features, no detail, just a human-shaped patch of darkness standing in the middle of the corridor, a few meters from my door. It didn't move, didn't come closer. My heart felt like it would tear out of my chest. I backed away slowly, slid the bolt tight, staring at the door with trembling eyes. Then the knocking came again. Closer this time. Harder. Tap, tap, tap. My laptop flickered and shut off. I threw the flashlight aside and switched on every light in the apartment. The yellow glow filled the room, but it couldn't chase away the icy presence seeping through every corner. I collapsed to the floor, clutching my head. And then, my phone rang. The screen read private number. My throat tightened. With shaking hands, I answered. On the other end, there was no voice, only knocking. 3 deliberate beats, slow and steady, echoing directly into my ear. I threw the phone onto the bed, my heart pounding, as if it would burst out of my chest. The knocking inside the receiver had barely stopped when... knock, knock. Knock sounded again, this time on the real door. I could hardly breathe. My hand clenched the flashlight handle so tightly, my knuckles went white, but I didn't dare move closer. In a panic, I dialed 911. The operator's voice came through, calm and steady. "What's happening?" "And where are you?" I blurted out in a rush. "Someone's been knocking on my door every night. I check and no one's there. It's happening again now. I'm scared." Before I could finish, the knocking stopped. A heavy silence swallowed the room. Then the operator gently asked, "You said knocking. Do you still hear it now?" I turned my head, my chest tightening, and as if to mock me, at that exact moment, 3 more knocks rang out, but not from the front door. From inside the closet. I froze. My mind spun. I couldn't tell what was real anymore. The operator was still asking, "Are you still there?" But I didn't answer. All I knew was that I could never open that closet door. I tossed the phone aside, bolted straight to the front door, my hands trembling as I unlatched it, and fled down the stairs. The hallway was icy cold, neon lights flickering above. I could still hear the knocking echoing from my room upstairs. Knock, knock, knock. But I never looked back. When the police arrived, they searched my apartment. No signs of forced entry, no traces in the closet. Only the door itself was scratched, streaked with faint gouges, as if fingernails had raked across the wood. They concluded I was probably stressed, paranoid, and told me to get some rest. But I knew I hadn't imagined it. And the old woman on the fourth floor knew too. When I told her, she only nodded slowly, sighed, and said, "It's found someone new again." I never slept peacefully in that apartment again. Within a week, I moved out, leaving the keys on the kitchen table. As I walked down the hallway for the last time, suitcase in hand, I heard it clearly behind me. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, I didn't stop. I walked straight down the stairs and left it all behind. And even now, many nights when I wake in the dark, I still hear 3 knocks somewhere around me. Light, steady, persistent. A reminder that once you've heard the silent knocker, it never really stops looking for you. Story 3. The Man Outside the Window. I've always considered myself a rational person. I don't believe in ghosts, and I don't scare easily. But there was a period, back when I lived in a small rented apartment on the edge of the city, that shattered all of that confidence. My apartment was on the first floor, right next to the complex's parking lot. The bedroom window faced directly onto the courtyard, just a few meters from the sidewalk. During the day, it was convenient I could pull back the curtains and watch the sunlight pour in, see people walking by. But at night, that same window turned into a dark, incomprehensible hole, a black frame where I could never be sure what might be lurking on the other side of the glass. It started one winter night, around 2 a.m. I was drifting in sleep when I heard a faint tap like someone lightly rapping their fingertip against the glass. I jolted upright, heart skipping. The room was pitch black, except for a pale smear of yellow light spilling in from the street lamp outside through the curtains. I held my breath, listening. Again. Tap. Tap. Slowly. I pulled the curtain back just enough to peek out. The parking lot was silent, empty, just dark trees swaying in the wind, and a few cars glazed with a thin white frost. I forced myself to believe it was just a branch brushing the window. I closed the curtain, lay back down, but sleep was gone. The next night, the knocking returned. The same soft, patient tap. Tap. This time, I switched on my desk lamp, walked up to the window, and yanked the curtain wide. No one, but I noticed something on the thin film of frost covering the glass. There were 2 long streaks, like the smears left by fingers, dragging downward. A chill ran through me. I told a classmate the next day, and he laughed it off. Probably just some kids messing around. Knock and run. I forced a smile and tried to believe him, but it didn't stop. The following week, every night around 2 a.m., the knocking returned. Each time I pulled back the curtain, nothing. And every morning, when the frost melted, faint impressions were left behind: fingerprints, handprints, as though someone had been pressing against the glass, peering inside. One Saturday night, I decided to try something different. I turned off every light, sat in a chair facing the window, and left the curtain slightly open. I wanted to see who was actually doing this. The clock ticked, 1:58, 2EU0, 2:03. I started to feel foolish until suddenly, a figure appeared. A man. He was standing right outside the window, in the hazy yellow wash of the street lamp. His face was swallowed by shadow, but I saw him clearly leaning forward, pressing his forehead against the glass. His hand tapped slowly, rhythmically, against the window pane. My heart turned to stone. I didn't dare move, terrified that even the smallest shift would let him know I was there, watching from the darkness inside. I sat frozen, barely daring to breathe. The man outside kept the same posture, forehead pressed against the glass, as if he wanted to push through it. The knocking continued. Steady tap, 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 not hurried, not forceful, but patient, deliberate. In the dim, flickering light, I could see his shoulders twitch, slightly, as if he were laughing silently. But his face remained swallowed in shadow. I reached out slowly, grabbed my phone from the table, and opened the camera to record through the narrow gap in the curtain. On the screen, nothing. Just an empty stretch of darkness. No figure. No movement. My breath quickened. I peeked again. Through the curtain, he was still there. Clear as day. Just a few steps away. A shiver crawled down my spine. The phone couldn't capture him, but my eyes could. My hands shook as I dialed 911. The moment the line connected, the knocking stopped. The man slowly lifted his head. This time, I caught a glimpse of his face, pale, with sunken eyes and lips twisted into a tight smile. Then he stepped back and dissolved into the darkness, melting into the black of the parking lot. The police arrived about 10 minutes later, sweeping flashlights across the lot, but found nothing. They said it could have been a homeless man looking for a place to sleep, or that I'd been seeing things. But I knew I wasn't imagining it, because the next morning, on the glass, faint but unmistakable, was the imprint of a long hand etched into the cold dew. The following nights, I couldn't sleep. I shut the curtains tight, left all the lights on, but the knocking still came. Once, I even heard breathing soft and steady just outside the glass, like a whisper of wind. Another night, I woke at 3 a.m. to see the curtain swaying slightly, as if someone had just let go of it. I started questioning my sanity. I couldn't focus in class. My body grew gaunt from lack of sleep. Friends asked what was wrong, but I only forced a smile. Deep down, though, I knew he hadn't left. He was still out there, waiting patiently. One evening, I tried something new. I propped a small mirror against the window, thinking that if anyone pressed close, I could catch their reflection from inside. I sat staring at that mirror for nearly 2 hours. Then, at exactly 2:05, the knocking returned. In the mirror, no one, but the glass itself bent inward slightly, as if pressed by some invisible force. My throat tightened, eyes glued to the reflection. And then, a hand appeared in the mirror, long, bony, corpse white, flattened against the pane. Yet right in front of me, outside the window, there was nothing at all. I shot to my feet, chair clattering to the floor. The soft tapping turned into furious pounding, hammering as though trying to shatter the window. I screamed for help, and neighbors' lights flicked on. In that instant, everything stopped. Silence. When people rushed over, all I could do was point to the window, where damp, misty handprints were smeared clearly across the glass. They stared, bewildered, unable to explain. But that night, as I sat alone, staring into the dark frame of the window, I understood the truth. The man wasn't just standing outside anymore. He had found a way to look inside me, into the deepest fear I thought I had hidden. After that night, I stopped trying to fight it. I realized that no matter how tightly I drew the curtains, how many lights I turned on, or even if I taped paper over every pane, he would still be there. That man didn't belong to this world, and he didn't care about the line between outside and inside. I tried sleeping in the living room, farther from the window, but at exactly 2 a.m. The knocking returned this time from the small kitchen window. I rushed over, turned on every light. Nothing. Only the wind whistling through the parking lot. I felt like I was being cornered in a cat-and-mouse game, one I could never win. Another night, when I finally drifted off on the couch, I woke with the chilling sense of being watched. I turned my head and saw him. That man, his face pale as ash, his eyes black hollows, pressed against the sliding glass door that opened to the balcony. He wasn't knocking anymore. He just stood there, smiling. A long, unblinking smile. My body froze, paralyzed. Then, as if he knew I had seen him, he slowly raised his hand, pressed it against the glass, and dragged it downward, leaving a streak across the fogged pane. I screamed, yanked the curtains shut, and called out desperately for my neighbors. When they arrived, everything was gone. No figure, no smile, only me, trembling, eyes burning red with terror. Nobody believed me anymore. A few weeks later, I moved out. I left that apartment behind, left behind those sleepless nights. But I didn't escape. At my new place, I slept peacefully for only a few days until one night, at 2 a.m., I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap on my bedroom window. My breath caught. My heart froze. I've never dared to open the curtains since. I'm terrified that if I do, I'll see him there, still the man outside the window waiting, smiling, and never leaving. And sometimes, when I wake in the dead of night, I swear I can hear faint breathing just beyond the glass. Slow, deep, patient. Story 4. The Stalker in the Woods. That summer vacation, my 3 closest friends and I decided to go camping in a forest, about a 2-hour drive from town. We wanted to escape the city for a while, find a quiet place with nothing but the sound of insects and rustling leaves. The forest was known for its beauty, but it was rarely visited because of how remote it was. That was exactly why we chose it. No Wi-Fi, no shops, just the 4 of us, a campfire, and stories to last through the night. The first day passed normally. We pitched our tents in a clearing near a small stream, built a fire, grilled some food. As the sun set, streaks of orange and red filtered through the trees, and shadows spread across the ground. When night fell, we sat around the fire, telling ghost stories, laughter echoing through the woods. I remember that feeling of peace right before everything changed. Around midnight, just as we were about to put out the fire and crawl into our tents, we heard a sharp crack, like a branch snapping. Everyone froze, staring toward the sound coming from inside the forest. At first, I thought it was just wildlife. But then came the footsteps, undeniably human, slow, heavy, pressing down on dry leaves with each step. "Are there other campers around here?" one of my friends whispered. But the forest was silent otherwise. We hadn't seen a single soul. We pointed our flashlights in that direction. Only the trunks of trees stood there, swallowed in thick darkness. The footsteps stopped. The air was so heavy, It made our skin prickle. After a few tense minutes, we convinced ourselves it must have been a deer. We climbed into our tents, trying to sleep. But I couldn't. I lay awake, listening. Sure enough, sometime after 2 a.m., the footsteps returned. This time, they circled the campsite. Not fast, not frantic slow, deliberate, as if someone was stalking us. I dared to peek through the slit in the tent. In the pale moonlight, among the trees, I saw a tall, thin figure, standing perfectly still. He didn't move, just watched the tents. His face was hidden in shadow, only his narrow shoulders visible. My breath caught in my throat. I didn't dare move. Then, very slowly, he turned and disappeared into the woods. The next morning, I told my friends what I'd seen. They thought I was just exhausted and imagining things. But when we stepped outside, the evidence was there. Footprints. Human footprints, long and deep in the damp soil, circling the campsite where we had slept. We all fell silent. No one felt like joking anymore. On the second night, we built the fire larger, pretending to stay calm. But once the clock crept past 1 a.m., the footsteps came back. This time, it wasn't just one, it sounded like more. 2, maybe 3 people, shifting in the darkness, sometimes close, sometimes farther away. And then I heard it faint laughter, high-pitched, almost childlike, but twisted, distorted. It drifted out from deep within the forest. We froze, holding our breath, flashlights sweeping wildly. Again, nothing. But all of us knew. Without a doubt, we were being watched. We were beginning to panic. On the second night, hardly anyone managed to sleep. Each time the fire started to die down, one of us would scramble to throw on more wood, as if the light itself was the last barrier between us and whatever was lurking out there. Around 3 a.m, when exhaustion was dragging our eyelids shut, I heard whispering. Very faint at first, so faint I thought it was just the wind stirring the leaves. But the longer I listened, the more certain I became. It was a voice, a human voice, muttering something over and over, broken, indistinct. I shot upright, whispering to wake my friends. We all held our breath. The whispering stopped. Then suddenly, from somewhere in the trees, came 3 sharp claps. Clap, 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 echoing unnaturally loud in the still night. We screamed, huddling together inside the tent, hearts pounding out of control. The next morning, we argued bitterly. 2 of my friends wanted to pack up and leave immediately, but our car was parked 3 kilometers away through dense forest. Running in the dark risked getting lost or running into wild animals. In the end, we agreed to wait until daylight. Still, the thought of enduring another night here chilled all of us. That afternoon, we scouted around the campsite. Nothing unusual, just more footprints pressed into the soil. But one detail froze us in place on the trunk of a tree, right next to our tent. Someone had carved 4 straight lines, with a diagonal slash across them, the tally mark for 5. The cut was fresh, sap still glistening. Someone really is watching us, one of my friends whispered, pale as a sheet. The third night fell. Nobody told ghost stories anymore. We sat in silence, ears straining at every sound. The fire crackled and popped, but the darkness pressed close around us, heavy, suffocating. Then, at exactly 1:38, The footsteps returned, but this time they didn't circle the campsite. They stopped right at the edge of the clearing, just a few meters away. I shone my flashlight, but the beam revealed nothing. Still, we could feel it. Someone was standing there, just beyond the firelight, staring straight at us. Suddenly, from deep in the forest, a laugh rang out. Long, hoarse, inhuman. Then silence. No animal in the woods laughs like that. Shaking, we retreated into the tent, yanking the zipper shut as tightly as possible. In the dark, I heard the nylon walls rustle softly, like a hand sliding along the fabric from the outside. One slow circle around, then another. My friend gasped, choking on his words. "They're circling the tent." I bit down on my lip until it bled, clutching the small folding knife in my hand. The sound of fingers tracing the nylon continued slow, deliberate, unhurried. Then it stopped, directly where I was lying. The thin fabric stretched inward, as if a face was pressing against it, only centimeters away from mine. I froze, eyes wide open in the dark. Through the thin nylon of the tent, I could clearly see a round shape pressing outward like a forehead, or a face pressed right against the fabric. I held my breath, every hair on my neck standing on end. A heavy, rasping breath vibrated the nylon. Then, a whisper, right beside my ear. "Count until it's over." I wanted to scream, but my throat locked tight. Suddenly, a rush of footsteps thundered all around us, as if many people were sprinting in circles around the tent. Distorted laughter, bursts of clapping, chaotic sounds, like a grotesque carnival in the middle of the forest. The four of us clung to each other, trembling, praying for daylight to come faster. Then, without warning, everything stopped. No footsteps, no laughter, only the pounding of my heart, like war drums in my chest. Outside, the forest sank into a suffocating silence once more. When the first rays of dawn slipped through the canopy, we bolted out of the tent. What had felt like a nightmare was confirmed by the evidence left behind. Footprints surrounded our tent, at least 4 or 5 different people. And on the tree, right in front of us, a new mark had been carved, 6 deep slashes gouged into the bark. There was no more arguing. We packed up in frantic silence and ran straight back to the parking lot. The whole way, I felt eyes watching us from the trees, following every step. Back in town, we reported what had happened. The forest ranger only shook his head, muttering, "You kids got lucky." For years, there have been whispers about a group of people wandering those woods. Nobody knows if they're a real gang or something else. The only thing people agree on is that when they appear, the trees get marked as if they're keeping count of their victims. We said nothing. None of us dared to. Even now, years later, I sometimes dream of it. In the middle of the night, I hear those claps echoing through the forest. Clap, clap, clap. And I still see that face pressing against the tent, hear the ragged breath, and the chilling whisper. Count until it's over. Story 5. The Knock That Never Came. I moved into a small suburban house at the start of autumn. It was a quiet place. Red-tiled roof, a wide porch that looked out onto a paved street where hardly any cars passed. I thought it would be a fresh start away from the noisy city, finally able to enjoy the peace of the suburbs. But I didn't know that this seemingly safe house would become the setting for the most haunting nights of my life. The very first night, after unpacking my things, I collapsed onto the sofa in the living room, outside. The sky was pitch black, the only sound the wind blowing through the trees. I was drifting towards sleep when I heard it knock. Knock, knock. A tapping at the door. Soft, but unmistakable. I jolted upright, heart racing. It was late. I didn't know anyone in this neighborhood who would knock at this hour. I walked to the door and peered through the peephole. The porch was empty, only the faint yellow glow of the street lamp spilling onto the grass. I opened the door just a crack and looked out nothing. I told myself maybe I had imagined it, or maybe a tree branch had brushed the wood. I locked the door again and went back to the sofa. But just then, knock, knock, knock again. This time, I knew for certain it was knocking. I rushed to the door, looked through the peephole, still nothing. The following nights, it continued. The knocking came like clockwork, always around midnight. Every time I ran to check, the outside was completely empty, but slowly, a detail dawned on me that froze my blood. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It came from within the door itself, right behind the wood, as though someone was standing inside, knocking out. I began to lose sleep. Each night, as the clock neared midnight, I would tense up, waiting, and right on cue. Knock, 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 not fast, not forceful, but steady. Patient, like a reminder that I was not alone. I installed a security camera aimed straight at the porch. The next night, when the knocking began, I grabbed my phone instantly. The camera detected motion, but the video only showed the empty porch. Not a single figure entered the frame. And yet, in the audio, the knocks were perfectly clear, 3 distinct taps, resonating from the door itself. I mentioned it to an elderly neighbor. He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes shadowed with discomfort. Finally, he said quietly, "This house. There used to be a woman living here alone. They say she vanished one winter night, door locked from the inside. All that remained was the knocking neighbors swore they heard. The police never found her." The neighbor's story haunted me all day. When I got home and looked at the old brown wooden door, I suddenly felt as though it was breathing, holding in a secret I never wanted to know. That night, I didn't sleep in the bedroom. I stayed in the living room instead, eyes fixed on the door. The clock ticked forward, the faint blue glow of the night lamp reflecting on the window glass. When the hands hit exactly midnight, I heard it knock, knock, knock. This time, the sound wasn't from outside, nor strictly from inside. It echoed right in the middle of the wood itself, like a heart beating within. I shivered, gripping the handle of my flashlight. "Who's there?" I shouted. No answer. Then I did something foolish. I stood, slid back the bolt, and cracked the door open. The cold night wind swept in, rustling the dry leaves. No one was there. But just as I went to close it, a burst of icy air hit my face, and I heard it clearly knock, knock, knock right next to my ear, from the inside surface of the very door I was holding. I slammed it shut, bolted it with trembling hands. My heart was hammering wildly. From that night on, the knocking changed. It no longer came only at midnight. Sometimes at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., even while I was cooking during the day. I would still hear it, softer now, but relentless. And each time, I had the creeping sensation that someone was inside the house with me knocking, just to remind me I was not alone. I asked a friend to bring over his professional recorder. That night, we left it running until morning. When we played it back, our blood ran cold. Amid the static and faint clicks, 3 knocks rang out clearly. But then came something else, a whisper, long and rasping. "Let me in." My friend went pale, packed his things, and swore never to set foot in that house again. I began to fear sleep. Whenever I drifted off, I dreamt of standing before the door, hearing the knocks, opening it to nothing. But when I turned back inside, the door would slam shut, and behind me, a tall, thin shadow would be smiling. One morning, as I was leaving for work, I noticed 3 faint streaks on the inside of the door, long, like claw marks from fingers. I was certain they hadn't been there the night before. I knew then I didn't have much time left. That night, I decided to leave the house. My bags were already packed, and I was only waiting for daylight to get out. But as if something knew my plan, the knock came earlier than usual at exactly 10 p.m. I froze in the middle of the living room, suitcase in hand, sweat beading across my forehead. This time, the knocking didn't stop at 3 beats. It repeated, relentless, echoing through the entire house. And I realized it wasn't just coming from the front door. It reverberated from everywhere, the windows, the walls, even the wooden floor beneath my feet. Panicking, I switched on every light, but the brightness did nothing to drive away the sense that the house itself had become a massive drum, and someone or something was beating from inside the 4 walls. I rushed to the front door, yanked the bolt free. The door flew open, cold wind slapping my face. But when I stepped onto the porch, the yard was empty, the street deserted. I exhaled sharply, about to shut the door when, from behind me, inside the house, came knock, knock, knock. I spun around. In the dim yellow glow, I saw a tall, thin shadow standing in the middle of the living room. It had no face, just a shapeless mass of darkness. Yet I could feel its eyes fixed on me. And in that moment, I understood it had never been knocking to get in. It had always been inside, long before I ever moved there. I ran, never looking back. When I reached the main road, I realized I was still clutching the suitcase, my hands trembling violently. That night I slept at a friend's place, and the next morning I hired someone else to collect my things. I never set foot in that house again. A few weeks later, I heard the place had new tenants, a young couple. I wondered whether I should warn them. But then, one night, as I lay in bed at my new apartment, I woke suddenly to a familiar sound. Knock, knock, knock. The knocking wasn't from the front door, nor from the window. It came from the wooden headboard right behind me, and I realized I had never left it behind in that house. It had followed me, and it would keep following until the day I finally opened the door. A knock on the door might seem harmless, but sometimes it's the first step into a nightmare. Because the most terrifying part isn't who's standing out there. It's the realization that the knock may never have come from outside at all. So if you hear knock, knock, knock tonight, will you have the courage to open the door?